And it's John Reed, and I am still in Seattle. I cannot get away from the Acumatica Summit.
And I can't get there.
Yeah, funny coincidence. My Enterprise Month in Review co-host and fellow Unpredictions conspirator and reliable Acumatica podcast co-chair Brian Sommer joins me virtually from Indianapolis, where you basically got the short end of one of the worst storms we've had in a while as far as air travel. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, it's been intense this last week. That's for sure. I have not seen that much snow stacked up on my driveway ever. Um, but like a good systems project and a good project manager, I went out there and I would clear it like 3 inches at a time as it was coming down, so I could just stay ahead of it. I knew what my critical path was. I knew how we were going to, what the goals were for and the objectives for the project. I gave everybody management by objective targets. We got it all knocked out, and even had some spare energy to take care of some neighbors' driveways too.
Yeah, just please don't write a Diginomic article on how project management is like managing a snowstorm. But anyhow, uh, you and I have traditionally done an Acumatica podcast for a long time, and we even did one last year when I missed the event due to unspecified illness. And we wanted to keep up the tradition this year as well. Uh, I'm on the third day now, and today was interesting because it was more free form, and I met with some partners and had some additional discussions. Last night, I taped and already released a podcast with Josh Greenbaum, who was a special guest stand-in for Brian, and we went on a few different directions, but there's plenty more to talk about. And so today we want to get into more on some AI strategy, more on some of the customers, because Brian, you spoke with a customer virtually, and I want to get into a little bit about some of the takeaways from those things. And I might blow a couple of gaskets before we're done around AI hype in general. So let me just do a couple of reviews of the company, because one of the things, Brian, that I think sets you apart from a lot of analysts is you tend to have like a much clearer overall corporate overview of the direction of a company, and you're often looking in our discussions to clarify those things. And so that did come up in our initial discussion with John Case and Sanket, who's been promoted to president, chief operating officer. And we talked about, one of the analysts asked about, just basic numbers, and Acumatica selectively releases those, but tends to be pretty open. They have not updated their customer number from 10,000 a couple years ago, because they consider that a milestone number, but they announced that a couple years ago. John Case also said they had all-time record growth here in the last year and record profitability. I thought that was interesting. They also said the lowest churn of all time and the best net retention ever. So John was feeling pretty confident. I thought that was interesting because, Brian, small businesses are not necessarily in a universally awesome position in this economy, and Acumatica itself has talked about the impact of things like inflation and tariffs and all of that. And so I was curious to get your reaction to those numbers in the general climate.
So interesting you bring that up. I've had a phone call with an old client of mine, and they squarely fit in that SMB space, maybe on the higher end of it, but they're there. And they need new technology. And the reason is they've outgrown what they had before. This has been a perpetual problem with SMBs as they outgrow their starter systems with their QuickBooks or something like that, or Solomon, remember Microsoft Solomon, which was where a lot of the Acumatica people came from years back. When they outgrow it, they're looking for something else, and that never changes. There's always a certain amount of churn in the market. In the old days, I did some research on that, and we concluded that the install base of a vendor, about 8% of it turns over every year, and 3% of that is like guaranteed to turn over every year because the company is either organically growing or contracting, or it's growing and contracting due to M&A and divestitures. So there's always movement in the space. It's a good place to be if you're in the business of selecting software. fact, I don't think you and I have ever heard the people at like Upper Edge or, those firms ever complain that they don't have deal flow going on.
Yeah.
So the smart place to be is you want to be a vendor that is a net gainer in all of this kind of turnover activity and not a net loser. And apparently, what you're telling me is that Acumatica is definitely still picking up a lot of new business from other companies as others are shedding it, whether they wanted to or not.
Right. And it also adds some weight to my side of the cloud ERP versus AI debate, which is that modern cloud ERP is most likely a prerequisite to the right kind of AI versus an impediment. And I want to get back to that later in the podcast because I've got some fresh fuel to that fire and I might blow a gasket because I'm getting pissed off arguing with LinkedIn AI evangelists. But but the
I'm going to back my chair up for this, but
yeah,
anyway.
but the other thing that is interesting, Brian, well, there's two things. One is that I went to a pretty big SMB Insights customer panel that had a ton of attendees in it, and they did a hand poll, and about half the customers, as you were describing, were moving off of some form of legacy software that
Mhm.
really just they had outgrown for any number of reasons. And then almost as many were coming off of almost nothing at all, like basically running off of spreadsheets and homegrown manual stuff. And that's really been a sweet spot for Acumatica. And I think it's interesting for Acumatica to position even more around taking, saying to a company, you can go from here to pretty complex operations on this platform. And one of the characteristics that you find a lot with Acumatica customers, there are some family businesses, but a lot of Acumatica customers have pretty complex operations, even if they're pretty small. Multiple service lines, multiple product lines, multiple regions, concerns around compliance and risk management. So it's easy to see how they need so much more in the industries that they work in than what the out of the box finance software of an SMB could ever provide.
To your point, I think listeners should watch or listen to some of the customer interviews that like you and I get to participate in because these Acumatica customers, they're already talking about issues that would stymie most folks a few years ago. We want to do order fulfillment from multiple warehouses. Well, most simple ERP systems are lucky to have any warehouse management level, functionality, let alone do that. They're dealing with complicated um, financial accounting and payments around tariffs, which were never an issue really for most firms until recently. And we could go on and on. Your point is well taken because even small firms have some incredibly complex operations and they need a solution that scales. And you and I, we see a lot of the same vendors. I think Zoho's done a pretty good job of scaling up over time in a lot of their application areas, and Acumatica, I think, has done a very good job of this. And one of the things I'm finding fascinating are the best companies avoid creating redundant product lines or having redundant products or making a bunch of willy-nilly acquisitions that never get completely rewritten and placed into the correct platform. These, Acumatica knows how to make the changes that are going to stick around and work for them long term.
Yes, and I think one of the really interesting things to grapple with Acumatica is I don't hold it against Acumatica for being aggressive in their AI investments in messaging. I'm only saying that there's a lot more to the story in terms of where I'm perceiving the greatest value that they're currently delivering. But let me just run through briefly
Okay.
some of the AI news announcements, just so people kind of know what happened at the show. Acumatica made a number of announcements. One of the big ones, they have different kind of visions for AI, including embedded assistance, an advisor that can help make sense of broader decision intelligence. They talked a lot about their AI studio, a platform for designing, managing, and executing customized pipelines. Eventually, essentially prescriptive AI workflows or agents, but it's part of the low code, no code framework, which by the way, they've really done a good job with low code, no code already. One of the interesting things is in the hackathon this year, 13 teams competed, and only a couple of them actually had to use any code to build their solutions. So that's always been a precept of what they're doing. The assistant will be interesting next year because they're looking to kind of embed that across a lot of Acumatica, and it will be available on more of a trial playground basis in the R1 release, which comes out earlier this year, and then R2 in the fall will be general availability. And so this year we're going to find out a lot more about what value customers perceive from this. But what I can tell you off the bat is what customers like about that type of idea is making information more accessible to the so-called casual user that has generally struggled with interacting with ERP systems. So ERP has classically been the domain of the super user. And so that's the thing that I think customers are most excited about is turning that loose to make it easier for users to interact with the system. How well that goes and what that all means remains to be seen. But what I thought was really interesting was that as Acumatica started to talk about the impact of AI on some of their specific verticals, that's where the conversation got the most interesting to me. So they started talking about new capabilities like a retail cross-sell assistant. And keep in mind that retail can be any company that has customer-facing front ends, not just retail customers. Sales profitability dashboards, order orchestration, and then looking into manufacturing and distribution, shop floor kiosk type stuff. And in the keynotes, the feedback that I got is once Acumatica really started digging into, for example, a construction-based process, they were really showing their depth of domain expertise. And so they were looking at issues around raw materials and windows that start as large sheets of glass, but some of the glass is broken. What do you do with that broken material that gets rolled into the job? And okay, now there's labor costs involved, and it's real life on the shop floor. I think Acumatica really hits their stride when they have that kind of conversation. And I understand why they wanted to talk about systems of intelligence because all ERP vendors are trying to show they're not just a system of record, that they're strategic. And I understand why they're doing that. But the really cool, I think, stories that came out of the show were more of those industry stories around here's how we're solving industry problems. And yeah, sometimes we're using AI as part of that. Sometimes we're not. But again and again on stage, customers spoke to the value of visibility, real-time visibility, track and trace, like a single source of truth came up a whole lot. And that I think hits customers where they care about the most.
So let me amplify some of your comments. I would agree. The vertical angle was probably one of the most interesting ones for the show for me because when they talk, when the way they describe these capabilities, to your earlier comment, you could tell somebody at Acumatica spent time not, in the field. I think they were talking about walking the halls or walking in the shoes of the customer, what have you. And, sadly, a lot of the major ERP vendors we run into, it's hard to find any of their employees other than salespeople who've actually made the trip out to customers and prospect sites. They don't know how to do primary research in some of their other, competitors, and I think they suffer badly because of that. Now, in contrast, here's Acumatica, and they clearly take the time to understand what's the problem. And I thought, to me, the one that really stood out was they had something called the Amazon Sales Profitability Dashboard. And someone took a lot of time thinking about all the different kinds of issues that these retailers are having when they put stuff out on Amazon. They don't know, like, what are all the possible fees and charges I'm going to get hit with, or how can I see them all in one spot? And how do we put that in like a P&L format? And given their accounting roots, I think they do a really good job of answering some of those questions. But they also have the technology to make it very painless for just a casual user to find out, are we not pricing this correctly to get and maximize our margins and deal with the fees? And should we even use Amazon as our distribution channel, or should we go somewhere else? This is the kind of stuff you only get when you do the work. And it sounds like somebody at Acumatica did a lot of work in all of these different kind of verticals because the examples were very, um, I don't want to say industry specific because that's such a general term that doesn't mean a whole lot. But they did things that to your point have impact and relate well to customers. One of the things I used to advise software companies 25, 30 years ago was I wanted them to make a mugshot book. I want you to, on one piece of paper, write down a critical business problem that a customer has. Tell me what the problem is. Next paragraph, tell me how much it's costing them. Dollarize this thing. Show me, and how much in extra labor is it triggering, whatever. Then show me the characteristics about this. And then tell me what would the ideal solution be. And put all that on one page. And when you get about 300 of those coalesced together, then you really start to understand these are the critical problems that our customers and prospects have. And a good vendor will have a solution already thought of for every single one of those kind of critical problems. That's the kind of stuff I don't see in the industry. I see a bunch of people going, we need to just put the words AI on every screen or somewhere on every workflow. We're going to say something in here is going to be AI-ish and call it a victory. And that's unviable.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I mean, everyone knows by now that there's not a single keynote that I really enjoy usually. So it's a really high bar for me. I totally get that. And I understand why Acumatica wants to lead with AI because it's really important for them to be able to make the case to their customers that you can trust us to build the AI you need and put it in your products because a lot of these customers frankly can't afford to develop their own AI architectures and all of that. And so I get why they want to make that point. But in my mind, when they really got into the industry domains, manufacturing, construction, it showed that intimate domain knowledge. And I would have liked to kind of lead with that and then say, oh yeah, by the way, this puts you in an incredible position to start applying various forms of AI and intelligence to that domain that we're solving these problems in for you. And so anyway, that's just kind of a thing. But in general, like the customers on the ground, and I want to get into the customer you talk with now, but the customers on the ground, just to provide a little more context there, uh, by and large, I think they were feeling, and I think they're correct about this, that all the hard work they did moving to Acumatica from their older disparate systems was laying the groundwork for the AI type stuff they might want to consume in the future. So essentially, all the hard work on consolidating data and consolidating processes, uh, that puts them in position now and started to take advantage of the real time visibility of the platform for better decision making, workflow automation. There's a whole lot of workflow engine work going on in those customers too. Some of that is very deterministic and configurable and nothing to do with AI per se. But the point is, they see that they're moving to a more modern platform that positions them for the future. But I will say, they're also saying along the way, we learned a lot of hard lessons about how hard it is to get quality data, and to maintain data quality. And they know that they have to now to get better AI. And so a lot of customers are very preoccupied with how to get better data governance and make better decisions on clean data. And they've taken a lot of humble pie, I guess you could say, getting there. And so that was one of the overriding things we heard at the show.
Hmm. Well, I think there's been a big awakening out in the customer world generally that if you don't have clean data, then you have no chance of getting any
Yeah.
value out of AI. It's a garbage in, garbage out problem. So I
Yeah,
think
that
there's
came out during that exact phrase was in keynote number 1 from one of the customers on stage, that exact phrase. So,
yeah.
yes.
But I think the world's finally coming around to that, and that's going to have some rather dramatic implications on customers running on a mixed mode of some really antiquated old tech, like stuff still running on client server or even older green screen kind of products, and as well as early cloud stuff, later cloud things, non-AI stuff, AI stuff. You're not going to be able to get a lot of value out of that unless you get the data cleaned up. Um, you know, I also think customers are starting to realize that best of breed has its place, but it's more on the periphery apps, not on the core stuff. And I think they've awakened to that. And they like vendors who are continuing to build out more, not just in just back office or front office, but build all the operational systems and so forth. And one of the things that I was kind of pleased to see in the first keynote was some discussion about a digital, they want to build this like digital pipe of information that's going to go in, through, and out of Acumatica systems. My shorthand for that is they want a digital fingerprint that starts from the beginning of when somebody has an idea of a product or service they want to sell, and you can follow every aspect of that transaction until the last bit of the fulfillment is completed. Um, that works real well in theory. I've seen so many companies struggle with it because they don't have all the things put together that will actually facilitate the movement of that digital fingerprint through the entirety of the value chain and the supply chain. So um, we know they have manufacturing solutions, and we know they do some pretty cool stuff. They're kind of like I think their manufacturing, positions them well. I think Plex would be the next step up as far as kind of a solution that, takes it even further in that regard. And Plex has got a great digital, fingerprint story as well. But the two things have to go together. If you don't have the fingerprint and the continuity in there, along with clean data, then you don't have an answer. And I think Acumatica could have hit that a little bit harder, but they do have those components. So kudos to, they have most of those components. So let's put it that way. And they can take a win on that.
Tell us a little more about the customer use case interview you did this week.
So I met with a guy named Neil Cantrell. He's a director of IT at a company called Wilmar Performance Tools. Interestingly enough, I've seen some of their products, and they get a lot of their material is contract manufactured in markets like China and elsewhere. But they supply all kind of tools. Like I think he said his top two products that they sell are air tanks and grease guns. I know, sexy, right? You've probably got 20 or 30 of each laying around in your house right now,
I got
John.
one in my suitcase, man.
Let me know if you get that through TSA. They've been on Acumatica for 7 years. They've been live on Acumatica for 7 years, and they took 2 years before that getting to being live, but they did it all. They did a giant big bang implementation. Neil's been a count 'em 4-time MVP customer of theirs, so I kind of figured he was going to have good things to say when you're a 4 times MVP. So he was reasonably positive, bullish, and everything else. But he was definitely told a good story. They use pretty much everything they can from Acumatica. They do have a separate warehouse management system. They have a homegrown EDI tool, but they're going to be migrating off of that. His biggest business challenge, or the company's biggest challenge lately, he goes, well, first we had to survive the COVID wave, and now we've been having to deal with the tariff challenges. And we talked some about that because it complicates some issues regarding to vendor performance and financial tracking and everything else, as well as supply chain management. Because at some point, if we remember just a few months ago, there was a question whether we could even get products to come into the country because of uncertainty around some of the tariffs. So we had a nice conversation on some of that. He's very keen on looking at a number of things in their product roadmap. We talked about some of their fulfillment capabilities that they work with. What else? We also talked about structurally, that's an industry that has some real challenges right now. His firm's not the only one getting hit. We talked about how some of the big automotive parts stores, retailers that we all know, like Advance Auto, Napa, and companies like that, they have some real challenges right now. Many of them have exceptionally high days payables outstanding, where they owe money to suppliers, well over 100 days, maybe even 200 days. You can't be a successful company if you're not paying your bills at some point, I guess. So, and we talked about how structural matters like that are really impactful in industry. Bottom line, this guy's company still continues to grow. It's advancing. There's no intent to be moving off of anything else, moving away to Acumatica for the foreseeable future. They like where they're at. It does. It's not enough to say it does the job. It's basically standing up and standing tall for a company that continues to just keep growing like that. So
And can I ask you just real quick, like just for a contrast, like how does he think he would have contended with like tariff issues before Acumatica? You know what I mean? Like if he wasn't running Acumatica but running on his old school systems, would that have like swamped him?
I get the feeling that would have been the case. They got through COVID because of a different set of Acumatica capabilities, the ability to do a lot of stuff remotely, because everything was in the cloud and so forth. They were positioned technically to be able to handle a different kind of way of doing work then. They communicate with all kinds of suppliers and shippers electronically as well. So they've been able to get through a lot of that. The question, though, is now what they got to look at is, and we talked briefly on this, nothing's concrete here, but we talked about how they may have to start shifting more and more of their sourcing locations to other countries. And that just adds a new layer of complexity to what their environment's been like of late. But I don't, I think the tariff stuff would have been very problematic with a, let's say, less advanced set of financial systems controls and integration. The fact that it's all real time, it's all in the cloud, it's instantaneous on the information has made it easier for them to manage in a very, let's call it, dynamic yet challenging world.
It was interesting, John Case during our analyst discussion, because we asked him about the impact of tariffs and other economic factors, and he talked about how it's definitely impacting some Acumatica customers and some of the sales deal flow as well. But he also said in other cases, it's helping our deal flow, because companies are realizing they need a more sophisticated platform to deal with these kinds of market conditions. One thing I really wanted to kind of hammer on here a little bit is this AI thing. And I believe that there's almost no customers out there that don't want to miss out on innovations powered by quote unquote AI, whether how intelligent it is, we can have a nice long debate about. No customer wants to be left out of that. I'm not going to say that, but I believe, and you see what you can react to this in a minute, but I believe that what customers really want more than anything is you talk about these so-called systems of record. So all these LinkedIn AI fanboys are putting down systems of record. Well, I keep telling them that no system of record vendor is sitting on their butts saying we're a system of record. They've been working on this stuff for a long time because they started losing business to analytics companies quite a long time ago and started waking up to the fact that transactions don't power strategic relationships. But the point is that I think what customers really want from an operational backbone like Acumatica is the ability to respond to market conditions quickly and fast and be resilient but also manage the risks of those situations, whether it's screening suppliers, moving to new suppliers, capitalizing on new market opportunities. They don't want their ERP systems and other systems to block them from those moves or make those moves difficult. And I believe that historically, ERP was not quote unquote agile enough to do that. But so for example, I talked with a customer and I got into this in more detail in my podcast with Josh, so I'll keep it short here. But the customer venture engineering in the automotive arena, where a lot of their products are one-offs and they're always winning new business. And so I asked them, do you ever have to do custom stuff inside of Acumatica for a new product or a new business line or a new service line? And they're like, no, the system's been flexible enough that we can always just reconfigure for whatever we need on the fly. And to me, that speaks volumes about value. And I'm not saying that AI can't deliver even more value on top of that, but to me, that's a core value. And I'm just getting really sick of those kinds of software environments being dismissed as systems of record, because that's way more than a system of record. I'm sorry, it just is.
Okay, so folks may not know this, but you and I don't necessarily take time to prepare for these talks.
Oh, no, we do not.
Well, I mean, what I'm getting at is we may have our own notes about some key topics we want to get at, but I don't know what John's going to say and vice versa generally. I have a slightly different view on the AI side. I'm not trying to provoke your AI meltdown that you want to do, but here we go. I think the way a lot of vendors are approaching AI is they've been sprinkling pieces of AI all across their enormous ERP product lines to the point where I counted on one vendor over a year and a half ago, they had 70 something AI capabilities coming out in just a couple of HR modules. Okay, so think about that. How does one customer get their head around all of that? That is a problem. Now, I think what we're looking at is I'm going to call it the artificial intelligence buffet line, where you're like in a cafeteria or whatever, one of these smorgasbord places. There is an AI capability that an ERP vendor, they've got hundreds of them out there. The question, though, is how much appetite does any one customer have at any given point in time? They can only digest so much of this stuff at one time. So the question really for customers or prospects is, do you really know and understand what is not only the art of the possible, but where the big pain is? Tell me where it hurts. And then let's go find out. Let's find which AI pieces you want to implement now. And then you'll repeat that process over time. But this idea that customers need to look at everything a vendor is going to do, I'm not sure that's going to be useful, and we're getting some ridiculous AI stuff did get produced. You've heard me just rag on these vendors for coming out with job description generators. I mean, there's been bullshit AI, functionality that's been produced as well. So anyway, sorry,
100%.
I'm ranting when
No,
it
no,
should be you ranting.
No, this is great. But let me just divide this up a little bit. I want to get back to AI in a moment. But would you agree, though, that isn't the goal that a customer would have of a system like Acumatica that it does what I just described, that it allows them to adapt quickly to market conditions, seize new business opportunities, and make smarter decisions, all within the context of the platform that they're investing in, aka Acumatica at this point in time, regardless of how much AI or not is in there? Uh, isn't that really what they want? Is the ability to do that in volatile conditions and knowing that they're not stuck on systems that can't adapt quickly?
I'm not going to disagree with that. I
Very
think
good.
I think customers have been burned since the early 80s by software vendors who sell very fixed, rigid, inflexible products.
Right.
And I think a lot of customers have never known what it's like to actually have systems that are as dynamic as the business world that they compete in.
Right. And what I'm saying is that putting AI into overly rigid business systems doesn't fix the systems.
Correct.
It's not going to work. So, what I'm saying is you need a flexible environment that can still execute bulletproof, deterministic transactions, hopefully automatable in ways that are deterministic and reliable. And then we can start looking at probabilistic AI on top of those systems. I just think there's no replacing that. And actually, I'll do my informal Acumatica Partner Award, and I'm holding this up for Brian. Protected Flow Manufacturing, which is shop floor scheduling made easy, real time production scheduling. But a big conversation there was about modernizing MES systems and the fact
Mm.
that the lack of visibility on the shop floor, and this is a company that can do that for you, uh, is a critical issue that came up. Josh brought this up as one of his key talking points in the podcast yesterday: is the lack of operational visibility into these areas and how you can't you're not running any meaningful AI on top of that equipment unless it's modernized and communicating effectively. So there's a lot of work ahead, Brian, and I think we're gonna have a discussion about this next year as well. I don't know that we solved it today, but it was fun to riff on it with you.
I think we've got a career in front of us still to be talking about these kind of matters for quite some time. Your point on the verticals, let me just add that I thought it was interesting how much of what's being developed by Acumatica is still being done by them. And they also have a very vibrant partner group that's also building some stuff out. I was doing some other stuff this week on another vendor, and I realized that they're not really innovating that much. They have to rely almost exclusively on their partners. And Acumatic, thankfully, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting themselves in a lot of areas on some of the, let's call it some of the new horizontal technologies, as well as the vertical capabilities in some of those industries. And that's all good. I think a buyer wants a vendor that's got that kind of a focus because they are walking the talk and they're walking the shop floor, which was something else. I don't remember if that was John Case or Ollie or somebody was commenting about that as well. You need that in a vendor. There are some vendors who never go out to visit a prospect or client unless it's someone who's going to write them a 12-figure check, for some global intergalactic enterprise license. So that's the only one they'll ever get a visit. And unfortunately, they're going to get a visit from a salesperson, not someone who actually has any influence in the product direction of the company. Anyway, I think we've flogged this horse a bit for today,
Yep.
John. From what I saw remotely, again, nice conference. Positivity all over the place. The AI stuff, it wasn't beat me over the head with it. And thank goodness there wasn't a drum corps, a marching band, Vegas showgirls, and everything else that I've seen in some of the Vegas events of late. So hopefully you're going to get out of there with your eardrums still intact.
Yeah, there was no drumming circle on the last day. That makes me feel good. I like my chances for the flight home. Brian, it was really good to have this open-ended conversation. I think we covered some interesting ground, and we got a bonus rant and kind of AI kick around. I think that's really fun and useful. So thanks for doing this. And next time, hopefully we triumph over the weather.
Well, yeah, hopefully I don't have to get in this problem again here anytime soon. Thanks to Josh Greenbaum for filling in for me. That was nice, Josh, to do that. So,
I can't do one by myself, man. I got to get someone in the chair. So.
well, he's more photogenic than I am, but he can't do my accent. So, what can we say?
100%. All right. Thanks, Brian.
See you, John.
Gotcha.